Hey, what is up, YouTube family? It is IK right here. Alright, I got one more little video and then I'm out for the day. So, I wanted to give my take on the current state of the US economy. This is like a little, economic political pep talk. So, I wanted to, give like my little take on this, but before I do that, be sure to hit the like button, do what you gotta do, and that's pretty much it. So, yeah. Uh My whole take on this is pretty impartial. I think where things are going right now economically is quite interesting. Um, I just had like that little live stream with Libertarian Scotty. Well, Libertarian Views Scotty M, and I think that was a pretty good conversation that I had. Now, my whole take on this is I think the current state of things is very weird politically, and I think the U.S. economy is definitely on shaky legs if things do get worse at like a Great Depression level. I'll try to keep everything as consistent as possible, but as far as like where things are at, like economically, the U.S. is definitely at a really tough spot with massive, you know, massive how should I say, like massive deficits with the job market not being consistent to hire people as easily. So therefore it's a lot harder to find a job, and I think economically, like, I could agree. Like, I'm not too sure if it's true to agree with this, but like, America is going through a you know, economical recession, and it could very well be a Great Depression because like the amount of money that companies are probably not able to really afford due to a lot of like government regulations that probably swindle businesses in a way to say, hey, like, we can't really afford the same amount of people that that we want to hire, so we have to cut a lot of positions, and therefore a lot of ideas that businesses probably wanted to do, it just wasn't there. So I mean, I'm not too sure. I think like where things are at economically, a lot of like medium-sized business firms that are not heavily heavily structured compared to corporations that are more financially structured. A lot of businesses are not able to really keep up with a lot of like massive costs that probably cause a lot of businesses to keep themselves, properly sustainable. And I mean, there's probably other elements to it too, but there's many things that you could do to kind of like prioritize a better economy, which part of that is the U.S. government getting involved and making things far more far more like expensive for a lot of like business entities to stay in business. So I mean, that's at mostly at the federal and local level, but I think like where things go right now is obviously that the cost of living. Um, I think like the cost of living is very terrible. I think a lot of Americans are very ignorant to see, let the nation be in shambles. To think that, oh, it's just greedy businesses that just don't want to pay people, and people have to work two, three jobs just to barely survive. And my whole issue against it is that the reason why you have crappy jobs exists is obviously due to state intervention, but also just due to like the functions of um, poor poor incentive or poor disincentive that forces the younger generation to not be in a position to wanting to succeed. So therefore you have like a lot of like younger individuals that have a poor person generational mindset where they have the degenerate function of a thinking like that they don't need to work as hard, so therefore, I'll just let mom and dad like figure everything out. Even though that I went to school and I like, I'm supposed to have everything correct, but no, everything is like everything is basically ingrained on you being heavily reliant off of someone else's wealth. And I think that's a very, that's a very unhealthy way of living because a lot of people live a mindset of being too economically dependent of where things can go. And I could very well be wrong, but it's like how many families do you really see that are growing their families to be financially stable? Like, the answer is not many because there is a generational gap where most of the like financial, you know, like financial household incomes in the US is cut in half if not more, where most families are not holding that much money just to raise children, but as they have their families and then they even try to look for a house and then they try to sustain financially, they're not really doing that good. And I can very well tell that a lot of families that even have kids right now, they're like, oh well, my life is terrible. I got all this debt in college and blah blah blah. And it's like, do you see where the mindset's at? Do you see where that Orwellian mindset leads to? And I'll try to keep this as neutral as possible, but I will say that a lot of Americans are trapped into the cult of personality mindset where everybody has to just be, like I don't want to be disrespectful, but it's very slave minded to be in the mindset of I'm not going anywhere but staying in a cycle of like mental duress. And I think that's what a lot of people are in. They're too culturally, you know, they're too culturally stagnated with thinking about what other people think of them. So therefore, people don't think about their future. They think about what other people say about them. Therefore, people are so worried about what other people say. They're not worried about what their future holds. They're not worried about where things can go to a whole different direction. They're too worried about how other people, see them. And therefore, whenever they talk about their lives and their struggles financially and economically, it's like the average American psychic mindset is very deranged and very delusional to think that, well, everything will just be fine because government will just take care of everything around me. And that's not how it goes. You have to live a very self-reliant lifestyle to have a sense of independence where you could feel comfortable where you are. And not many people are in that state of being comfortable. There's a lot of people that struggle and then they don't understand that their struggles will only get worse if they continue to go down the path of thinking you could have a life to enjoy whatever you want while struggling in massive debt and destruction. And I think it's really terrible to see that most Americans that don't have financial futures set up for generational wealth is terrible. Uh, I think I've seen previous articles from the past that the average American holds like what, less than $400 in their bank account. But it's like, if you can kind of see like if you can see like the economic failures that are being applied to the population, especially from the social standpoint, it's not good because it's like if a lot of people are being heavily reliant off of being socially dependent off of off of like each other, or I'm sorry, I should have said economically dependent off of each other, then that's a massive red flag for people that think that, well, I don't need to work as hard and I don't need to save up my money to have a place, to live and stay. Therefore, I'm going to choose to be lazy and I'm going to choose to just be a dummy and just have kids and then boom. I'm not Like, I'm not really prepared for anything in life. And I just think that's like, that's like a really sad reality in the, well, I think it's a sad reality in a first world nation like the US where the country should be far more greater than most other nations, which the truth is like America is far greater than most countries in the world. And a lot of nations that say that they're better than the US, like they're bowing down to the US economically to do business with America versus like America doesn't need to do business with them. The countries that are using a lot of like social welfare policies to to cripple their population, and people aren't really having to live their lives lavishly as they claim to say. Yeah, they're having to they're having to struggle more than your average, like American that doesn't have to work, you know, massive jobs, for X amount of hours for a long period of time just to barely make ends meet. But I mean, yeah, granted, like it's not perfect everywhere because for for some ignorant person in the U.S. saying, well, I live in New York City and I work 2 3 jobs, but compare that to somebody out in Finland or Norway, they probably have it better than me. And then I'm like, no, not really. Like they're having to work probably 10 times way harder than somebody that lives in the city that is probably collecting social welfare checks or getting some sort of government services where it's not really the best, but at least it's decent enough to the point where they could actually live. But the thing is that those people that live in Scandinavian countries, they have to go through a lot more sacrifices with their lives where they're not having to save their money at all. Versus like the average American, like you don't have to live in New York City. You can get out of that state and you can go to a whole different state and live your life a lot better. Like, granted, like if Americans had more educational opportunities to kind of expand their skills and actually get to a career that they want to do, where they're like where the state wasn't getting involved to ruin education, and therefore you could like bring people together more to give them the careers that they want, then most Americans would live a really good, long lasting career. They would have a much greater future to raise children the way that they need to raise them. But on top of that, more people would be more entrepreneurial minded, and they would have a much greater sense of having incentive to produce more wealth and actually get to a higher level of success. But the problem is that a lot of people aren't like that because the state has poorly destroyed education to the level of which you don't really have that drive in the American culture where a lot of people want to actually be business minded and actually like create their own entities, which I get it because the state has made it way difficult for you to even create your own company wherever you are in the US, because it's like at the federal and state level you still have to go through all these crazy regulations just to even have a business. Like so much for the land, so much for the nation that calls themselves the land of the free and home of the brave, but it's pretty much the other way around, the land of the free and home of the slave. So that's basically how it is. It's very disgusting, and it's not really producing the quote unquote capitalist means that it has. It's just like poor remnants of it that kind of keep it alive, and it's very low mid, free market, mixed economy, socialist, like market status, entities. So I mean, it's not a bad economy, but it's not good enough to the point where people can just live a good life and just be like, okay, being an American is so good because you could work a $16 an hour minimum wage job, and that'll be good enough for you to kind of live by every day when it's not true. So I get that part, but part of that is due to the state getting involved and making it harder to even run a business. Because ideally, if you were able to just make your own company from scratch without having to like put any money into it, but you didn't have to get these like, how I should say, you didn't have to get all these like business permits and licenses just to, just to open up a business. Like, regardless of like what it is, like it would be good. It would be actually like it would be way better than for what you have seen with today's structure of even making a business. But it's like if you had the means to just start from just no money and just make your own company with small little investments here and there, yeah, life would be pretty good, and you wouldn't have to go through like the crazy amount of business regulations just to have your money saved up just to barely even get something going. And I mean, I get it because it's like all the big popularized companies that you see now in America, like companies like Wendy's, Macy's, J.C. Penney, like all these companies had to take a massive risk just to start their firm, and it's not easy because it's like there's way too many functions within a lot of state, like a state mixed economy, like how should I say, state mixed economy, controlled market regulations that makes those businesses come about, where certain corporations are given legal status title to exist in a function where they're able to have the amount of money that they're able to produce because one, there probably has to be a lack of competition being prevented. Therefore, if it was just all fair game where businesses came into the market and they were able to compete at whatever level that they wanted to, yeah, I mean, businesses would not be as supremely wealthy as they claim to be, but it would be decent enough to the point where it wouldn't be bad. It actually would be far better. So I just think, honestly, when it comes down to it, businesses have the means to produce far more effectively without a state getting involved and making it harder for people. Yeah, making it harder for people to kind of get what they want. So if people did not have to, waste, any money for having to start a business, and it was a lot easier to produce more businesses in America with, little to no government, interference. Yeah, that would be a great future. Predating to my live that I had with Scott. Uh, yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Wanted to kind of give you guys like my little pep talk on that, and hope you guys enjoyed that. But I think overall the state of the U.S. economy is definitely not good, and hopefully things can definitely make itself a lot better and heal. But I would hope that things can go to a much better direction, and hopefully we get to see better things to come. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I will see you guys later, and hope you guys have a good day, and got more videos coming out. I'll see you guys. All right, peace, and goodbye.